And I will give you examples for each of the priorities so that you could understand what we do. So we are promoting Poland that is committed. And for example, in 2022, as a Polish embassy in Berlin, we organized a series of events to draw attention to the developments in Ukraine and the war that Russia is waging in Ukraine. For example, I organized a charity concert with a Polish-Ukrainian band, Dagadana, and all the funds that we collected during the concert went on to support Madame Zelensky's foundation. Also in 2023, exactly a year ago, I went with a group of German journalists to most southeast region of Poland, Podkarpacie, where the city of Rzeszów operates now as a main hub for international assistance that is later on sent to Ukraine. The Podkarpacie region is the one directly on the border with Ukraine, and it has a big, well, now it's big airport. It has now a lot of international staff that is dealing with supporting Ukraine. Second priority is Poland is inspiring. And for example, 2 weeks ago we organized a fashion show. We don't do it very often, but there was the Berlin Fashion Week running, and we invited Polish sustainable designers who produce eco-clothing from eco-materials, and we helped them present themselves on the margins of the Berlin Fashion Week. Priority number 3, Poland has a strong heritage. We are a country of a long and troubled history and rich culture. And for example, World War II here in Germany is an important historical event that we still commemorate, let's say, and every 1st of September to commemorate and honor the fallen Polish soldiers, let's say, we organize a commemoration at the British War Cemetery, where 6 of Polish fallen pilots lay. Priority number 4, Poland contributes to cultural dialogue between societies. And also last year I organized in the synagogue here in Berlin, Neue Synagoge, it's in Oranienburger Straße, very close to here, the one with the beautiful golden dome. I organized a concert to commemorate the fighters and the victims of the Warsaw Ghetto uprising that happened last year, 80 years ago. I organized this with the Israeli embassy and with the Jewish community in Berlin. It was a very moving event, and after the event we received a lot of press mentions, and one of the Berlin media outlets wrote that the Polish-Israeli reconciliation is happening in Berlin. I was very proud of this. In 2024, as I already mentioned, we will have big anniversaries, and that's the 25th anniversary of NATO accession and the 20th accession to the EU. So this was a theory, but now practice. I came to Berlin in August 2021, and I thought we will follow the regular lines of action and the priorities set by Warsaw. But then in February 2022, on the 24th of February, Russia full-scale invaded Ukraine. And all of a sudden, in day one, our priorities changed. My military colleagues came to action, my political and economic colleagues as well, and us, dealing with public diplomacy, we also had a round of calls. What do we do now? What is our main priority? And of course, the priority of a country that is directly neighboring a country that was just invaded was to help our neighbor. We started pressing our partners here in Berlin and also in many other capitals to be bold in their support for Ukraine, to be militarily supporting Ukraine, to start helping the refugees that started coming in hundreds of thousands to Poland and then further on to Western Europe. We started receiving hundreds of calls from German citizens asking, how can we help? So we were also sending those individual or organizations to Warsaw central administrations and local administrations to help them deliver the help and the supplies that they wanted to deliver to the fight in Ukraine. We also wondered, how do we act publicly, and how do we speed up international and European support to end this war? We also started helping Ukrainian institutions, and in my case it was Ukrainian cultural institutions that could not operate in Ukraine. And they basically came to us asking, what can we do together to help us, first of all, survive, then to help us cherish and show our unique national heritage that is now attacked by the Russian enemy. How do we do it together, and can you please help us? And that's also what we did. We gave rooms and space and people and funds to help them show Ukraine has an identity, Ukraine has culture and history that is worth to show in Berlin, and that is very much appreciated. In doing all those public diplomacy and cultural diplomacy actions, we often had to cross the lines of the traditional diplomacy. It is very difficult now to draw attention to actions that we do. So sometimes we had to become very undiplomatic to make people understand that there is actually a war raging, a conventional war in one of the European states. For us Poles, it was, of course, a friendship with Ukrainians, but it's also a topic of our own security as Poland, as a EU member state, that is directly on the war front line. And I have to be very honest, it was even difficult here to explain this in Berlin, that there is a war happening at the EU border, because for Germany there's a buffer zone, and the buffer zone is Poland. There's still one country that is defending and helping Ukraine, and that's us. We started in the embassy with solidarity and symbols. We hang Ukrainian flags. We made a number of campaigns in social media. We made hundreds of briefings with German journalists to explain what is happening in Poland, what is happening in Ukraine, what's the situation and what is needed. Central and local administration in Poland and our embassies and consulates tried to help the refugees find their shelter after Poland in some other European countries. And why was this all important? Apart from a threat of a spillover effect, let's say, and of our security being in danger, we need to understand the impact the war has had on a Polish society itself. And let me give you some figures here. 70% of Poles, 70%, were personally involved in providing help to Ukrainian refugees in the first 3 months of war. And you might have seen the headlines saying, the Ukrainians live in the Polish homes. And this was true. We did not create the refugee centers, but within the first days and weeks of war, Ukrainian refugees lived with Polish families. 1.5 million Ukrainian refugees were taken in Poland in 2022. Many of them stayed, many of them came back, many of them went on to travel further, but that was the situation in 2022. And 10 million of Ukrainian refugees crossed the Polish border in the first year of war. And of course, that was coming in and out. That was several trips, either one way or both ways or multiple trips. But that was also a big burden on our border security guards, who had to work non-stop to help the people cross the border, to help the humanitarian assistance be moved in and back. And at some point, surprisingly, we saw an effect of our actions that we did not entirely expect. It turned out that the Polish support for Ukraine helped the image of Poland abroad. Our image has changed. We started reading in the press internationally, I will quote here, Poland became a major European player. Why Poland deserves to win the Nobel Peace Prize. Poland is now the true leader. How the Russia-Ukraine crisis is turning Poland into a strategic player. And in 2023, after all the reports, as you said, that were coming from embassies, from general consulates, from the Polish institutes, the ministry started analyzing the data that was coming, how the war, but how our actions influence our own image. Does our public diplomacy work? Do we have priorities, and do we do things right, basically? And I focused on Europe, not knowing you're from different countries. I would have different data, but to give you example in Europe, the image overall of Poland was very positive, and it has improved. And only in 2 European countries our image was still neutral, and that was Serbia, for a number of reasons, and Turkey. And also another fact was that Ukrainian is still perceived in parts of the world as a local conflict. It's only a European conflict that has no influence on other countries. And that's why we saw that the further we go, the less interest it creates. So most of the mentions about Poland was actually in Europe and its direct neighborhood, and less outside of Europe. And I think I will stop here with several conclusions that I would like you to remember from this meeting. Poland's image has improved in light of Ukrainian support. It wasn't deliberate on our side. We did what was right, but as a result of our action and as a result of every single Polish citizen, our image abroad has improved. But still, there was a number of difficult questions. And if you deal with politics, you know, there's many. Our big, let's say, problem was constant discussions with institutions in Brussels about the rule of law. And this was still mentioned in the press as a negative, let's say, topic, and it has influenced us in a negative way. Polish humanitarian aid was appreciated and noted, and even in countries with pro-Russian sentiments, which was very surprising to us. The support of Poland for Ukrainian cultural institutions raised no or very little interest of the local media, and that was very, it wasn't encouraging for us, and it wasn't encouraging for the Ukrainian side, and this gave us a lot of food for thought. How do we do it better? The interest in Ukrainian war is diminishing now for a number of reasons also. There's another war in Europe's direct neighborhood and many solidarity actions with another country. So this puts a lot of new energy on us to keep on our solidarity actions with Ukraine, and to keep on talking about the war that is still, unfortunately, raging in Ukraine. We do not see yet a Ukraine fatigue, as some of us were saying, some of our partners were saying to us last year and this year as well. Russia war still impacts the whole continent. And if you followed the Munich Security Conference last week here in Germany, you would see that Ukraine, Israel, but very often Russia was one of the top priority issues that was touched there. We also see and we observed some media reports, some politicians, and many internet trolls that are stating that our military assistance and that the overall assistance to Ukraine is prolonging war. And we are aware of those disinformation campaigns, and we are trying to fight them. We are trying to have several tools in place to explain it's otherwise. I would stop here then. Thank you very much for your attention. And if we have questions, I'm here.
Thank you very much, Magdalena. I have a number of questions, but this should not be a theater performance where only people on stage are allowed to talk. Anyone with a question, a comment? Yes, please.
Jean Tan from the Singapore International Foundation. Thank you very much for your candid sharing. You mentioned that there was a strategy, a public diplomacy strategy, right? and that, I imagine, coordinates the efforts of the various nodes and missions around the world. And in the same, so you said that a lot of your actions resulted in a better image for Poland, but that wasn't actually intentional. So my question is, how are you measured? So what is success to you or to your foreign ministry?
Right. I mentioned the strategy, and I didn't mention one important thing with this audience that we have. The strategy is also divided into different parts of the world. So we do not have one universal document. The document corresponds to the needs and to the specifics of regions that we work in. We would use different tools in Asia than we use in Africa or in Europe, in every single European country even. And how do we measure success? We do monitor media reports on Poland, and we analyze whether they are positive or negative or neutral, and whether the positive change or a positive media report is because of our actions. If it mentions an event or let's put it simple, or a conference that we organize, and then it's valued positively, then we take it as our contribution. I mentioned the Ukrainian support was not intentional, exactly for this reason. There were many actors, let's say, supporting Ukraine, and we did not intentionally, we have not written it in the strategy. We acted immediately, we chose the tools that were available at hand, and after some times we realized, even though nobody in the ministry thought, okay, when there is a war we help, we saw it. The assistance delivered on many, many levels, created positive mentions about Poland, positive image. Many foreign partners started contacting us to cooperate, which was also not expected and which was new. So it's press mentions, it's also number of events that we organize, number of conferences, number of invitations that we have to most important events, like to Munich Security Conference. If we have 3 leaders of Poland invited to 3 most important panels, then we measure it as a success.
I have a question over there.
Thank you. I also represent Greece. I'm a fellow here. I just wanted to comment on this highly imaginative, adaptable, and responsive program and set of actions you have. I work in the cultural sector for 16 years in the UK, and the criticism very often is that culture is removed from contemporary events. It's as if we operate on 2 different planets. And here, the sensibility you show to religious communities, cultural groups, but also a European country under attack is praiseworthy. Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Other questions, comments? Yes, please.
I am Magdalena Szuber-Zasacka, and I grew up as Ukrainian. I live all my life abroad, but I have some extended family in Ukraine, and I'm very thankful. We appreciate Polish nation for the great help of Poland in this difficult time for Ukraine.
Thank you very much.
My question is, as a diplomat, what's your vision of this prolonging of this conflict? That you promote help for Ukraine, and you want as much as possible military help when you come to the battlefield. But what's the perspective? What's the future of it? How do you see it? I don't see the end of it. What about you as a diplomat? Because war is not diplomacy. Sooner or later, some peaceful talk has to be started. You can see that Putin is not to stop just with little things. I don't mean the help, I mean all the community. Everybody tried to do something with the sanctions and everything, but it's not to stop Putin. I personally, as a Ukrainian, I don't see the end of it. What do you think about how it's going to end and where it's going to turn?
Thank you very much for this question, and thank you for the words of appreciations. And it's not me, it's everybody in Poland. That
My nephew actually, he lives now in Poland. His family brought him to Poland because they don't want him to fight. You understand?
I understand.
Some people want to fight, but some not.
Right.
And we belong to the family we don't want to fight for religious and other different reason. He has opportunity now to live peaceful life in Poland. He works from line, he's IT specialist. But we don't know what is going to happen, so we're all sort of unknown water.
Thank you for the question. I wouldn't be a diplomat if I couldn't stay positive. So I need to stay positive and work on maintaining, let's say, peace in this part of the world. I wish the war was over on February 25th of 2022, and it did not happen. And you can be assured there is no other priority for us now than to stop this war. In doing so, we listen to our partners in Kiev and in Ukrainian administration, because you know best how to end this war. And we do whatever there is for us that we can help. So we don't, I think I have never even mentioned peace negotiations, because it's not for us to negotiate, it's for you to make decisions, for you meaning the Ukrainians.
Yeah, but you have to put pressure, but you see that the Ukrainian government and what's happening in Ukraine just war propaganda growing farther. And I think we have conflict now on the Gregon's border, between Poland and Ukraine. It's not getting better.
This is very unfortunate that this conflict is happening, and you can also rest assured that our governments are talking, that the local administrations are talking. My government is talking to the Polish Ministry for Agriculture. They're talking to the people that are on the border and that are protesting. It's not serving any good to the war in Ukraine, to the situation in Ukraine, to the situation in Poland. And also what is, let's say, pessimistic is that it's happening in a year that is crucial for European elections. Local elections are happening in Poland in June, but also the European elections. And if we continue to have so many crises on so many fronts, this does not bring any good news to the situation in Europe.
If I understood your answer correctly, it sounded like they are the ones to decide and we support them, and their interests are our interests, which I think gives the wrong impression, because Polish interests are not identical with Ukrainian interests. And the same applies to Germany, which is one of the reasons why our Chancellor is so reluctant to send a particular weapon system, because he's also thinking about, can we avoid certain risks that could lead to an escalation in which a regional conflict turns global, and then we risk with a country that holds the second largest nuclear arsenal in the world, that this gets totally out of control and it's the end of mankind, to paint the darkest possible scenario. One doesn't need to support this position, but it highlights that on the one hand we should stand united and support Ukraine, because we see this conflict as a proxy war that is not a regional conflict about territory, but it is something that attacks what this institution and our whole project of European integration stands for, as a concept of how we live, how we interact, what our values and principles, what is the individual freedom that is provided by this system. But we are still different countries that are under different national constraints, like looking at the grain price consequences and the farmers in Poland that weren't happy about this, and a number of other indirect consequences of the war that makes people very unhappy, with far-reaching political consequences that could even lead to the end of a government, because after all, we report to the demos. So how do you balance this? On the one hand, being the supporter that you presented, and on the other hand, Polish interests aren't identical with Ukrainian interests. So if you could get a chance to end it in the name of we end the killing, but it's not the interest of the government in Kiev to end it because they want to restore the full, like, kicking out the aggressor and getting back to what it used to be beforehand, then we have an open collision of interests.
How would I end the conflict?
Well, you as either the citizen, and then we take off hats and just talk freely, or you as the one who should explain possible contradictions of this is the support side and this is the national interest side.
Of course, we are practical with the relationship with Ukraine. We have bilaterally, but then security of our own country and of Europe is a top priority now. So for us, we do not, you might have noticed, we do not discuss historical disputes that we still have.
Yes, we have some identity, common identity in West Ukraine. I come from the Lemberg region. It was Austrian, it was Polish, long time. And then the Soviet side became Ukrainian. A lot of Poland were resettled, a lot of Germans were resettled from Lviv and from the West Ukrainian region. We still have an issue
But we don't.
with each other to speak. But, well, it's not, we're not very different. At some point, at some regions, we have very similar identities as Ukrainian and, say, Polish.
I come from a region, from Podkarpacie, which I already mentioned. It's a region bordering with Ukraine, and we have a horrible bilateral history with difficult stories, difficult family stories. And still, since 2022, nobody in my region thinks the support for Ukraine is wrong, or that it's directed, that it's going not well, or that we are too generous, or that we are too welcoming. So there is, I would say, a big understanding in what situation Ukraine is. There is big support for supporting Ukraine, because we feel we are very close to one another, and that our first strategic interest is to keep Poland secure, despite other internal priorities that we could have politically.
Well, would it not be the best decision to give Putin the half of Ukraine, to leave the other part to European Union, but would it not be just more secure?
As I said, if this would be about territory, then you could just say, let's do it. But if you give in at this point of the war, how do you know that this doesn't trigger more appetite to try a similar scenario in Moldova or in Lithuania or in Georgia or wherever you could think of restoring the dignity and pride of the Soviet Union?
You think
if
we
this
have to stand up for what we have and fight until the end, until the last, as you say, until the last Ukraine?
We do hope this is not the case, but also I agree with you. We need to listen. Autocrats mean what they say.
Ukraine is 8 million less. 8 million less in 2 years.
But if you listen to, I would recommend you to listen to interviews that Putin gave recently and to the speeches that he held. We believe he means what he says, that he does not want to stop. He has his
No,
eyes.
I know he doesn't want to stop,
But why would he stop if you offer him half of Ukraine?
No,
Then he wants half of
I
Poland.
don't want to offer him half of Ukraine.
No, but that was what you were
I don't want
suggesting.
that the last soldiers fell on the battlefield, and what do we have then? We have to have some visions, some decisions, some right decision, not just.
Yeah, but the question is, who is we? Is it us to be in a position to tell Ukraine what they should do, because we are bothered with this conflict. It costs us, according to the Deutsches Institut für Wirtschaftsforschung, already in Germany 200 billion. So we are fed up with this. Go and finish this.
No, that's not what I want. We all are Europeans. We have to look at it. We have to think about it and be more realistic.
That's what we do.
Womb after womb and,
we are here to think
Ukrainians are dying.
with informed panelists who patiently wait until they also get a chance to say. So that's why I take the last one, and then we move on with our no worries. I invited you to ask. Okay, we take two, and then we open another chapter of our program. The gentleman in the center.
Yeah, so my name is Robert, and I'm from Ghana. I thank you so much for the wonderful presentation. And I just wanted to find out, first of all, how much Poland has been directly affected by the Russia-Ukraine war, because I know the proximity between Poland and Ukraine, and also the geopolitics of that peninsula. How much Poland has been directly affected, I mean, in terms of quantifying the losses and then the investments that have been made so far. Secondly, I also would like to know much about the effort of the European Union towards the end of the war, because just like he mentioned, so far Germany alone has spent over 200 billion euros towards this particular war. And I know so many countries individually have also contributed a lot. I am coming from Africa, and I know how much this war has affected the already damaging economies of the respective countries in Africa. In my country, for example, this particular war has affected Ghana more than any of the African countries, because we import a lot of things from Europe, and particularly from Russia as well. So it's a global matter. I don't know how much EU is also working hard to make sure that the war actually ends, and ends at a time where the world itself is crying for an end to this particular war. So I would first of all want to know how much
Thank you very much. I have not prepared any, let's say, numbers. How much we have already spent on military support. We currently spend 4% of GDP on military spending. How much we spend on social services for the Ukrainian refugees that are in our countries. They received education, medical care. We've opened our labor market for the refugees that are in place. The Ukrainian children are in schools, in kindergartens. The students are in universities. We made the procedures easier for them to come to Poland and live in Poland. So this was also a cost for our economy. I cannot think of any other costs, but it is a big one in our spending currently. I can also assure you that the EU is talking about Ukraine, and now we have a new government since December last year. And Ukraine is a top priority for any minister that is going to Brussels to talk about the situation in Europe and its direct neighborhood. We have the EU foreign ministers meeting that was actually taking place 2 or 3 days ago, and the top topic on the agenda was additional sanctions on Russia. As I said, I need to be optimistic. I don't see myself a way to end this war tomorrow, but I'm hoping it won't take forever, and it will not spill over to any other countries like Moldova, like Baltic countries, or anywhere else in Europe.
Yes, please.
Hello, my name is Fiza. I'm a student here at ICD. Firstly, it is so amazing to know that there are still countries that are practicing humanity to such an extent, which is wonderful to know. And it brings so much hope for people like us who belong to underdeveloped countries. That being said, Is Poland practicing, or does Poland have similar, similar strategies for the people of Palestine and the war that is happening in Palestine?
Mm-hmm. It's a topic I do not cover, I'm sorry, but I know, I listened to my foreign minister who says we do have humanitarian assistance directed to the Palestine community. And since October 7th, we have been moving the resources to help in a humanitarian way. I am not in place to comment politically the conflict, but I can assure you that since October last year we have spent resources on helping the Palestinians in the conflict.
All right, it is 11 o'clock. We could immediately continue with this because all the panelists are already on stage. Or do we need a short bathroom break or open the window? How do you guys feel? Who needs a break? Okay, then we just keep going and switch topics and move straight away from the national perspective, which was already quite European and international, to the question, is the EU a successful example of multilateralism and multi-level diplomacy? And it's my big pleasure and honor to meet again a former student of the ICD. So she is doing what you guys are currently doing at the ICD and belongs to the system of multilateralism. Dr. Zrinka Mozara is from Croatia and currently working with a member of the European Parliament. But what exactly she did in the past, what brought her there, and what she's currently doing is something she can tell us right away.
Yes, thank you very much. It's a big pleasure to be here again. I have been participating in quite a few conferences after my graduation, but it's always nice. Yes, I'm coming from Dubrovnik, Croatia. This is why the topic of the war and peace is very close to my heart, because I was born during the conflict in former Yugoslavia and grew up in Croatia that was recovering from the war. So 90s were not the best, the best years to remember for us, but doesn't matter. Here we are today, member of European Union for more than 10 years. I have been studying law and political sciences in Zagreb. Then I have been studying political and social sciences here at Humboldt University in Berlin. And I did my PhD at ICD. My topic was something we were kind of touching. It was a nation branding, like image, and national identity in former Yugoslav countries. I had a comparative case study of Montenegro and Croatia. And for, I think it was 8 years, like 9 years ago, I was doing the Blue Book traineeship in the European Commission with Commissioner for Development, Neven Mimica. This is something I would recommend to all the students who try to look for as many internships and traineeships you can. And European institutions are quite open also to non-Europeans when it comes to traineeships at least. So you can all apply for a commission traineeship. It's an amazing way to see how actually institutions are functioning. And then you can also apply to do a traineeship with a member of parliament.
Do you take interns?
We always actually look for interns, but unfortunately, because we work in German, it should be someone who
if you are fluent in German,
who is fluent in German. But also when I was working last mandate, I was working for Slovenian member, Mr. Ivo Weigel. He was a member in liberal group. I don't know how familiar you are with the structure of European Parliament, where there are different political groups. So he was from Slovenia, a member country, but a former of liberal group. And now I'm head of office for MEP Manuela Ripa. She's German MEP, but she works in a Greens FA group. Yes, and you can always, I would advise you to look for the group or maybe national whose language you speak, and then even send open applications. In last minute, I wanted to say we had quite a few trainees that were from non-EU countries. For example, I think we had someone from Azerbaijan because I was working with Mr. Weigel a lot on foreign affairs. And then it's always nice to have someone who is coming from that country. And now mostly I have to say we had German or people speaking German, but it's for practical reasons because we work in German. But yes, you can look into that, and to be honest, last 8 years, I really see that there are less and less people applying for traineeships. Before we used to get one application for a month or something. Now even when we publish that we are looking for someone, there are quite a few people applying. So you have a good chances. Be active, be proactive, and yeah, this is something I can really recommend from my experience. So yes, as I mentioned, I was working with Mr. Mangel a lot on foreign affairs and employment and social affairs. There are different committees in the parliament. So when you are chosen as a member, then usually according to your experience, you choose in which committees you're going to be active. Because of course, European Union and Parliament as such has loads of competencies. Some are legislative, some are less legislative, but you usually decide what you want to focus on. So I was working for a member who was a former diplomat for many years, and ambassador. So we have been focusing on foreign affairs, and now with Ms. Ripa, I have been working a lot in ENVI. It's a committee for environment, but it's also for chemicals and food safety and health, which was really important in this mandate during Corona crisis. And yes, this is actually when we were talking Ukraine and health, and it's a very important topic, but you wouldn't believe on what exactly European Union, how many competences in normal life European Union actually has. I was recently working, example, on revision of detergents regulation, and this is something we are literally using every day. And this is not Germany or I don't know, your member state deciding what you're allowed to put in detergents. It's on the European level. And it may be interesting to explain this, how democracy or not democracy, how it's functioning when the parliament is not allowed to propose a law itself, although this is the only institution that's kind of democratically chosen. I mean, council in some ways, but this is actually from the people they are choosing. You go to election, and please, if you have European citizenship, don't forget to vote now in June. It's very important to exercise your right, because it's going to be very, let's say, probably different political powers in the parliament in next mandate. So it's really important that
How many of you are from Europe? And Europe means citizens of the European Union or from the European continent? All of you are potential voters in June.
Yes, so
okay.
please.
So just to put this in context, this is a rather global group of people. Yes. If you encourage them to vote.
Yeah, I'm encouraging everyone with European citizenship. Yes, and it's very interesting. Actually, I myself didn't know how you vote if you live somewhere else, but you can choose in which country you can vote. For example, I can, because although I never got German citizenship, I can choose in Germany, but I can also choose in Croatia. I can choose where I'm going to vote.
All right. That was more meant to give you a sense of who's sitting there, now being very patient. Yes. On the other side of the panel, someone who was sort of at home here because he worked for several years as a member of the European Commission's representation in Germany before he left and spent the rest of his career in the Commission in Ireland. But there's much more to say about Willem Noë. Thank you very much for making time. And who are you?
Well, thank you, Uli, for the very kind invite. I'm again very happy to be here. This is indeed very familiar terrain to me. I worked at the representation for many years, a while ago, and I did a lot of presentations on the EU right here. So, my name is Willem Noë. I'm Dutch, from Amsterdam. I'm an economist, and I worked at the European Commission for more than 30 years. Basically on two topics. The first topic I started my career with was on international economic relations and globalization, what it means for EU policy making, what it is, how it works, and what it means for policy making at the EU level, which is a fascinating topic. But then I moved to something that interested me even more, namely the enlargement of the European Union, the entry of new countries as member states into the EU. I dealt with the EU accession of Cyprus and Slovenia at the time in 2004 and the years before, to help these countries prepare for membership and to check whether in economic terms, because there's different criteria for membership and one of them is economic, whether they are ready in economic terms for membership. With a team, of course, there's a lot of people working on this. Then I also I was part of the negotiating team for Iceland. Iceland had applied for membership. At some stage they decided they didn't want it after all, it's like Switzerland and Norway. And I worked for many years on the potential candidacy of Bosnia-Herzegovina, which is at the other end of the spectrum compared to Iceland in any possible way, and Macedonia. And in the meantime, I also worked on the economies in Germany when I was here, and indeed on the economy of Ireland, because that was linked to Brexit, and Ireland was on the forefront of what was going to happen as a result of Brexit in their economy, and it's a fascinating economy. So, like I said, I did a lot of presentations on the EU, and I always try to explain it in a way that I would have liked somebody to explain to me when I would first hear about the EU. And I never really heard that, so I decided to start doing it myself, because there's one, in order to explain, I'm not going to expound a lot on this, but in order to explain the EU, you need to look at both European history, at political science, and economy. Economics is a fantastic science, but it is embedded as a social science in the history and the political system of a country, of a region, of a local community, of the EU as a whole. And you have to explain also, you have to understand the worries that people have in the European continent on, for instance, Professor Brückner already mentioned it, you know, is this going to be a federal or United States of Europe? That was actually once a dream, in the 50s especially, and now for many people it's a nightmare. They did not become a member of the EU in order to lose their national sovereignty, as that word is often used a lot. But you have to explain, you have to understand where that comes from, that tension between, yes, we are all European and we should unite, and the treaties actually talk about ever closer union of the peoples, mind you, peoples, not nations. And at the same time, there's this feeling we are all unique, we are all special, diversity is the hallmark of Europe in almost every possible way, and we need to respect it for our cultural and historical and political identities. So we hold these thoughts at the same time. We should all unite, we're all European, and we're all special and unique. And that is a tension that constantly plays throughout the history of the EU, will always play. And the point I'm making here is that this diversity is not a weakness. The Soviet Union and Putin like to think of it as a weakness. In fact, it is a strength that in economic terms, but not only economic terms, provides resiliency. Because this diversity means there's many different ways to do things. Some things work better under these circumstances, other things work better. These things work better under different circumstances. And in that sense, the EU is a giant laboratory of diversity. And the attempts to harmonize, so to speak, are especially in the economic area. This is, of course, like internal market, and this is something that I've been very active in. But it's also, you need to explain to, we had to explain to Iceland, for instance, several times, because Iceland is a very small country. It's 320,000 inhabitants on an area that is larger than Ireland, actually, in surface. It's one of the least populated countries in the world. And we had to explain to Iceland, because they came to us with the question, well, you know, we're so small, how are we ever going to make a difference? And in any case, you know, if we're going to be absorbed, we're going to lose our cultural identity. This is a common worry for many of the countries, for all member states actually, be it small or big. So we had to explain, no, this is not the Roman Empire. You're not going to be dominated. Your voice is going to be really important, and it's not so much related to your size. It's related to what you are good at and the voice that you make and how you cooperate. A country like Finland or Slovenia, which are relatively small, when they became member, they surprised a lot of people in how active they were and how positive and constructive they were. And I remember when I was dealing with Slovenia, the Slovenes were everywhere when they arrived, in all the podia, in all the fora and events. And that gave them a really good image, and it gave them a voice beyond their size. And this is actually what the EU does. It's actually specifically almost tailor-made to help smaller member states almost more than big member states in political terms, if the country indeed is open to that. And it very much, this system very much reflects European history. But again, you have to go to history to understand where this comes from, where those concerns come from, how they operate now, because everything is deeply rooted in history. And like I said, I'm an economist. I'm actually originally from a very hardcore economic background with a lot of math and a lot of models. And I found out that if you ignore history, you simply cannot explain a lot in European economics even. You need that. So I turned very interdisciplinary in order to understand, as an economist, what is happening in the EU. Thank you. I'll stop here.
Well, in this respect, you are kind of a special representative of your discipline, and it's interesting to see that an economist believes that this project of unity in diversity respects the different cultures and who we are and what we come from to such a degree, and there is no threat because we are all aware of that diversity is a potential and this is where innovation comes from. But at the end of the day, as you highlighted, this is a single market with a number of policies to make it work, and the single market is capitalism. And capitalism means that for the sake of efficiency of allocation, we expose practically everything to compete. And a lot of things are not made to compete because the original idea of why we established a certain cultural development was not that we expose it to the other, which made a number of people in Poland fear that their conservative understanding of how the world should be, or what they consider to be the natural order of things, should not be exposed to too much of the other. Like if we apply your question about do we give the same helping hand to a person from Palestine as we give to a blonde Ukrainian mother who just crosses the border, then the blunt answer is no. Because there is a difference. A human is not a human. A human is distinguished by religion, territory, shared culture, and all the things in the eye of people who insist on my culture should not become a mishmash of globalization, but my culture feels closer to people on the other side of the border, although these other side of the border situations could also lead to tensions, as we discussed before, with a sort of identity question that it also comes with. And if we then add what Zrinka said, that European integration is not just another international organization, but we make laws, and all the policies that states are responsible for are more or less Europeanized. There are some that completely shifted to the European level. Like Poland doesn't sign trade deals anymore. We have a commissioner for trade who speaks on behalf of all of us, and we all have the same money in our pocket if we belong to the Eurozone. So this is gone. This is no longer a national competence. But in many other areas, we jealously insist on this is us and we make a difference. But if we look at the nitty-gritties of what Zrinka is working on a daily basis, it has far-reaching cultural consequences. Because what is not in line with European laws and regulations has no right to continue, because in case of a collision, European law is stronger than national law, which the previous government in Poland had a slightly different understanding about. But at the end of the day, you cannot run a legal system in which everyone can insist on, I write something in my constitution and then it's protected, because then you don't have a coherent legal space, then you have a Swiss cheese with everyone having its own exceptions and holes everywhere, which is not a functioning system. So as much as I support this, and as much as I'm also committed to European integration, I even put my button on today, we should also be aware that the very nature of this thing, that products, goods, services, and capital that freely circulate have a far-reaching changing effect on what used to be the culture before we started with this project. And then people like us, who choose to lead a cosmopolitan life, can easily sing a song of how beneficial it is. But I remember a few weeks ago, I had a group from the Alternative für Deutschland, which is the racist, Islamophobic, xenophobic, whatever phobic group of people in Germany. And they listened, and I had a very authoritarian way of telling the story, because I thought they might like authoritarian speeches. And they were quite impressed, because no one really explained it in that sound to them that they found more interesting than this soft talk, discursive, whatever form of interaction. And then a woman came to me afterwards and said, if I would have your life, I would also be a supporter of European integration. I thought, that's something to consider, that we, as the ones who choose to lead a life like this, can easily embrace this form of, well, we always reinvent the Polish culture, the Dutch culture, the Croatian culture, and mine. If you only look at the football players that won the title for Germany in 1974 and compare them with the one that won in Brazil, they are very different guys if you just look at how they appear, but they are perfectly German and proud to wear a German shirt. So Germany became a different country, and Europe is becoming different, but with what pace and under what conditions, and if that also comes with cultural costs, that's a very different thing to discuss. And that is why Zrinka reminded the ones of us who go for elections that there is a big choice between those who believe that this is how we build a common future, like multilateralism in practice, and those who rather want to build fences around everything that needs to be protected against globalization or the new liberal script of everything has to compete, and if you don't compete, then bad luck, then you're doomed to disappear and something else will take over. That was not so much what moderators are supposed to do, but I couldn't resist, because sitting here on stage and explaining what this is all about also helps to understand why we have such a strong Eurocentrist perspective today. So this is not what we normally do, but given that you study in Germany and that Germany belongs to something bigger and it's not self-explanatory what this something bigger is, we should also add from time to time something like a perfectly European stage to explain what this is all about, and therefore we are so Eurocentrist in not only who sits on stage, but also how we talk about the functioning of the system. So coming back to the question of the panel, is this form of multilateralism working? And from someone from within the machinery of the system, like it is a lot of institutions work like wheels and produce in a complicated, complex, long-lasting, not perfectly efficient form a compromise that we all could live better than without having one. So, from your daily work, what's your answer?
Yine.
Yine.
Yeah, I mean, it's as you said. Like I think what we get in the end, it's compromise. Is definitely not perfect, or not to everyone's liking, but to everyone's liking enough. And maybe just for understanding, I would tell you what's a trialogue. And this is where actually, like to become a law, it kind of proposals comes from the commission and then goes to the parliament. Everyone gives a little bit their touch.
Click a bit on the slides, because we have something that shows no further until we reach the institutions. And you can keep talking until we find.
So the commission comes up with proposals. Sometimes it's from commission itself. Sometimes it's kind of motivated or pushed from the parliament, or some urgent issue, and then it comes to the parliament. And now parliament, as I mentioned, there are different political groups. As we now also mentioned, there are like a far right groups, there are far left groups, and they all have to somehow agree on a common position. So there are lots of compromises there already. And then the same happens in the council. Council has to agree on something, and council is these institutions where the representatives of different member states are, to put it in very simple terms. So council agrees, parliament agrees, commission sends proposal, and then in this so-called trialogue, everyone sits together for many, many hours, during the like very often in the night, very often sleep deprived, and they have to agree to the common text. And then, yes, like I just wanted to mention this because there are also like council already made compromises, parliament made compromises, in commission, like we're working for like experts, we're working for many, many years, like probably I think the like experts from commission know the best the topic always. That's like there is no question in that, like when it comes to technicalities. Yes, exactly, like until the law becomes law, it went through so many compromises, then it's very, very often like totally different than how it came in a term of proposal. So yes, I wanted to say it's working, but it's like a huge machinery, and like very often it's not what you have at the end, it's not what you were hoping to have.
But what you are hoping to have is a normative statement, and that needs a norm. So the person who looks at it has a certain understanding. Like if you are an environmentalist group, you have a different hope compared with a company that produces certain substances or has to report.
Member state.
So you have conflicting interests, and in the past we used to go to war to find out who's right, and now in a more cultivated way we go to committees that look opaque, inefficient, slow, not effective. In the end you get something that is not self-explanatory. But the reason why it becomes what it is in the end as a compromise is that everyone had a say at a given moment in time. And they try to balance it between institutions for the whole, which is a directly elected European Parliament, and the executive of the European Union that is kind of the assistance of the member states, and the member states who, if it would be just another international organization, wouldn't need these institutions. But we were smart enough to add these institutions to the balance of power construction, because if it would just be representatives like Magdalena meeting with the other 26, we would agree to disagree and then we get nothing done. While they actually sit and say, it would be good to have a solution, but we don't oversee all the nitty-gritties, the details, the potential unintended consequences, but we send an agenda to those who should know how to do it in practice, and then we go home and work on Poland, Germany, and so on. And then they are left in the commission with well-paid specialists in all these different highly full of expertise units that they call general directorates, and they find packages of legislation to address what the heads of state and government thought would be good to have without knowing the details. And then they propose it, but they don't decide. And the decision is then made in all the different institutions involved that you find on the slide, in which everyone at a given moment has a certain way to influence and to make amendments. And if they agree after the first reading, mission accomplished. If it needs a second reading, also fine, but most of the time they end up with small representatives from the different conflicting institutions, and then they nail a deal in some sort of a not super transparent way of practicing democracy, but in the end you have a compromise. And so there is a lot to criticize from various perspectives, but it is, as I said, such a higher level of cultivated forms of conflict resolution that we simply stop killing each other in the name of we have conflicts, and therefore it's not something that works pretty well on a European level. But when we look at While We Speak is discussed at the G20, they are looking for how can we rebalance a dysfunctional global order. At the end of the day, it's about can we agree on processes and procedures that give everyone in a changing world a say in something that used to be Pax Americana, that everything was more or less designed based on the balance of power after World War II, and now we live in a different world. But if it should be run based on the rule of law, it's on the one hand a question of whose law and also who has a say in what kind of bodies. And it's not necessarily to reinvent the wheel if we have other parts in the world that give a practical example how multilateralism could work. So, Willem, what's your answer?
Well, I think you can replace the question mark by an exclamation mark, because given where we started as well, with 6 countries that were former war combatants, where the idea of France and Germany cooperating was indeed almost unimaginable, and to where we are now, 27 member states, and who knows in 10, 15 years time, we might have 35 member states or more. And the kind of cooperation that has been created, and you mentioned, I mean, there's a tension between what is considered national sovereignty and EU level. And that fight has always gone on, but in practice, of course, national sovereignty is in many ways long gone. And sovereignty is not so much the right to act, but it's more practically the ability to act. And the EU can be considered, I think, as a crisis management system, meaning that most of the crises we deal with, Ukraine, climate, populism, migration, etc., they will be there with or without the EU. The EU, in this kind of philosophy, thinks that everything that crosses borders stimulates cooperation. You can ignore the cooperation and try to go it for yourself. The thinking, though, is that if you do this together, because of the spillover effects, because of the support, moral, ethical, economic, political support you can offer each other, you can actually do something as enlightened self-interest. You will get out of this in a shorter time and in a better way, with less costs or less suffering. So, given where we start, 6 countries to now 27, and Brexit is a perfect example of how the consequences of leaving the EU, you can do it, but it's really extremely costly, like cutting off your nose to spite your face, basically. That it has been extraordinarily successful, given, again, where we come from. And you see also clearly that every crisis, and this is something that you will know on your personal level as well, and this works for member states as well, every crisis makes politically thinkable what is unthinkable before. So every crisis, in fact, enlarged the competences of the EU in terms of cooperation. We now cooperate much more strongly on healthcare. which was unimaginable. Member states were very strictly protective of national health care. And this is not something for the EU to deal with, or to make this a common approach. COVID changed all of that. Before that, 9/11, in terms of security cooperation, changed everything. Now we're talking about a much stronger cooperation in defense, which was also, I mean, not in terms of NATO, but in terms of the EU. That was also politically unthinkable before Ukraine. So you see this constantly expanding, not because the member states like it or love it so much, but out of sheer necessity, they do it for their own self-interest, because they know on their own they find it much harder, if not impossible to deal with. Also in the logic of the internal market, free flow of goods, services, capital, and people, which by the way is not the naked capitalism of the US. These are social democracies. We spend more on social health, social care, health care, education than any other part of the world. But they cooperate simply because it is helping member states themselves deal with the crisis that was going to come one way or the other. So in that sense, it has been extraordinarily successful. Both Uli and Zrinka already mentioned the messiness of the process. It will not win beauty context. Democracy is usually, the lawmaking in democracy usually never does. It's like going to a sausage factory and you see how your beautiful sausage is made. You might lose the appetite for it almost. But that is the price you pay for a complex democracy in which stakeholders, many stakeholders, have a voice. And it gets complex very quickly. Well, so be it. This is the real life and how democracy works for you. As long as there's accountability and transparency, which is also a never-ending process, of course, both on member states and on EU level. There's also very strong peer pressure, by the way. You sign up to the EU, you sign up to the treaties and to everything that the treaties stand for, because in the end, the EU is a community of values. Economics is just a means to an end. It's a very powerful means to an end to increase mutual interdependence for your own benefit. When a country becomes a member, not because it loves the EU or feels it's enlightened to help the rest of the world. Well, maybe it does, but most of them, they become a member because they feel it is in their own national interest to do so. And that's the short of it. And that's great. That's all you need. Because once you become a member, your sovereignty in any practical way, not maybe in a legal way, but I would argue in a practical way, increases. And the messiness, of course, of multilateralism and multilateral democracy is part and parcel of that. Member states maybe sometimes don't realize that when they become a member, they find out very quickly. But this is not to their cost, this is usually to their gain. Because they have a voice at a level where as a small country they could never hope to have. And that, like I said, the system is really designed for that as well. So I'm apologetically positive on that. With all the criticism, by the way, that you can and should have on the EU. There's no question about it. Criticism is oxygen for any democracy. You need to have that in order for a democracy to function, because it shows there's alternatives. The alternatives might be terrible, idiotic, doesn't matter. They must be discussed, because if you don't, then you revert to a dictatorship. The one way is the only way, and everybody else gets prosecuted if they don't follow that. There's a lot of European history for that as well, that has taught very a lesson that needs to be relearned every time again. This is not how to approach integration. It cannot be imposed, it cannot be forced. It must be done completely. Of your own free will. Of course, it's never going to be a free lunch either. It's always going to be cost in what you're going to do. But I think of all the systems, this system that we have now has many things to be proud of, and it's always a process. There's never always any point, and there's always things that need to be addressed, both politically, socially, especially because who's going to pay the costs, we also mentioned. Those people need to be compensated. They need to be heard. And that, like I said, said, is a process that never ends. There's always new issues and new crises to come up. It's part of life. In all my time at the Commission, 33 years, I cannot recall a time when there was no crisis. There were always crises, usually multiple crises. So it is a fact of life. But in a way, it pushes, and it's horrible and it's terrible, and we need to deal with them. There's the only silver lining is that these crises effectively push into more and more cooperation. The EU has been extraordinarily creative in dealing with crises that they have to deal with one way or the other. But I think that is a record we can really be proud of. Not to feel comfortable and settle in our ways, it never ends. But we have a track record of dealing with crisis that I find very impressive. Okay, that's my defense.
Magdalena, sovereignty is an illusion, as we just heard, and the system, how it works, makes smaller countries punch above their weight. But if one listened to the previous government, it rather felt like it's actually run by Germany, and Germany manipulates the president of the council, who now turned to be the prime minister of Poland again. So it's kind of a secret agent of Germans. How does it work to be a diplomat who's supposed to sing the song of those who have this in their speeches? Because at the end of the day, what you personally think doesn't matter so much in your job description, because you have to sing the song of the government. And then suddenly the agent of a German dominance becomes the democratically elected prime minister of Poland. How does that work? Or does it end up in schizophrenia and you cry at home in your pillow because you chose to be a diplomat?
It's a very interesting question.
My pleasure.
I entered the service in 2010. It was the first government I served for. Then the previous government came to power. It was 2015. And last year, the roles changed and a new government, liberal, pro-European, came back to power with the prime minister that served as the European Council head. We still have an independent foreign service and civil service, which means we cannot be political. And we used to have, and we have career diplomats in the embassies and as our ambassadors. There are limits to what we can say in public as diplomats, but I can also assure you it wasn't forced upon me to become a politician in the past 8 years. Of course, I do have my personal political opinions and the choices I make every 4 years. When there's election coming, I'm a diplomat, we have a strategy, we have national interests that are pretty much same, and we do defend them as diplomats, and we are not forced never by the politicians to say and to repeat what they say about the
But you have to fight for something that is Sachstand, like the position that the government formulates, and then you have to deliver it. In that sense, you do sing the song of the government, because you are the executive of what they define as priorities of the foreign policy.
It's a very difficult job, but it's a very challenging job, but it's also a very interesting job. We are a service, we cannot also be free and independent in what we do outside. And entering the service means we do serve the government. That's basically it.
That's basically it. Now I would like to open the floor if you don't have something urgent to add, because as I said, it should have been something more interactive. Questions, either about how the system works as a practical example of multilateralism, or anything to open the floor, because as I understood, your perspective on Europe is not so much about the internal mechanism, but much more what role Europe is currently playing, not playing, should play, will play in the future. All of this is part of the bigger picture, and we will try our best to respond. Although I promised to Zrinka, who said that she's so highly specialized in what she currently does, that any question about numbers or things like that make us look as if we are an encyclopedia. We are not. And in times in which our little helper in our body extensions can always answer the question much better than how we remember things, this goes without saying that even if we are part of the system, we cannot answer everything, but we can try. So who would like to start the discussion? No questions, everything is crystal clear. Yes, please.
I wanted to ask
Willem,
yes,
who will return in a second. I didn't give a bathroom break, here he is. So, Willem, a question for you.
Yes.
Yeah, so it's basically about the membership of the EU.
Yes.
And also about the concept of unification of the EU.
Mm-hmm.
I know that not all countries in Europe are members of the European Union. And I am concerned about this because of the added advantage that the EU has and the opportunities that it continues to create. For example, the idea of economics where it's, the EU is interested as a regional bloc to provide single market for its members. I think this advantage can be extended to every member country, every country in Europe, so that they can all benefit from the opportunities that are being created by the member states, which come together as a union. Unfortunately, it seems that there are certain barriers that stop so many countries, especially some of the countries in Eastern Europe and maybe some part of Southern Europe, who are not economically strong enough to be part of the EU. And for me personally, I think that is a little bit confusing because these same countries can leverage on the advantages of the European Union to boost the economies, to improve their systems, and to be able to come out of the situation that they found themselves in. Because the EU has certain benchmarks that these benchmarks can actually leapfrog them into the new economic advantages that they have. So that is the first part of my question. The second part of my question has to do with how harsh are EU sanctions to member states, especially to countries like France, to countries like Germany, and some of the founding countries that actually conceive the idea of the formation of the EU.
Okay. Well, first of all, for membership of the EU, there is no minimum per capita income or GDP or something like that. The economic criterion for membership is that you have to have a functioning market economy. That's it. And for instance, when Ireland became a member with the UK and Denmark in the 70s, Ireland was among the poorest countries in Europe. Now it's actually one of the richest countries after Luxembourg. So the thing is, you use each other's advantages. And we had the discussion, for instance, as well with new member states. A lot of older member states were afraid that all of these new member states have such low wages. How can we ever compete? The new member states were afraid, oh, but your industry is so powerful. How can we compete? So what happened is you use each other's advantages. So German companies, especially car companies, moved massively into the Czech Republic because they had a car industry there, but it was a lot cheaper. And the Czechs benefited because they got all the technology. The German car industry benefited because there's a new market and it's lower wages, etc. So that's what you start using. That's how the dynamics goes, also in globalization. So you have to have one functioning market economy. That in itself is already quite challenging for new member states because they never had a functioning market economy before. So now we have to start looking at that. Definitely, that logic is not only, by the way, applies to the EU. It applies to something called an European Economic Area, which is much larger, with non-EU members, but still being European, have mutual access to that in terms of trade, in terms of internal market, or certain parts of the internal market. I agree with you though that the logic in itself is actually global. Why cannot other countries have that? But then indeed, for instance, especially in agriculture, that's a big issue. Because if Ukraine if and when Ukraine becomes a member of the EU, we would be an agricultural superpower, by the way. But we already had it, for instance, with the entry of Poland. Poland was a vast agricultural area. There was a lot of worries among the existing member states like Spain and Italy that they were going to be wiped away. In the end, that didn't happen. Why? Because there's compensation mechanisms. You do not immediately let the market flood because you do not want to wipe out all farmers in the existing member states. There's a lot of compensation and adjustment mechanisms for that. But your second question.
EU sanctions.
Sanctions. There's a graduation of sanctions. It usually starts with a polite letter from the Commission that the country does not meet the body of the European Union law requirements. It's on the screen as well. The European Commission, one of the main tasks is guardian of the treaties, which means that we have to check constantly whether the member states are meeting the rules and regulations that they themselves voted for and agreed to, and that the Commission introduced often at the request of the member states themselves. The member states need an independent expert because they will not trust any of them among themselves to act as a police officer. So it starts with a letter. Then the member state gets a chance to rectify that. If it doesn't, then the letter gets more, another letter follows, it gets a bit more forceful. For instance, at the end, if the Commission considers there's a consistent breach of the body of European Union law, you get asked to appear for the Court of Justice. This process, well, first of all, the Commission usually wins, but maybe you know this better than me, but I think they win about 95% of the cases, Commission. Member states usually know very well that they're not correctly implementing the body of the European Union law. But they count on the fact, well, this is going to take years. In 3-4 years, that's a long time. A lot of things can happen. In the meantime, you can still get away with that. It's not quite that easy and simple, but that's often the process. Now, there's other sanctions as well. For instance, there's a massive budget now called New Generation EU, which is almost as large as the EU budget, which is an instrument to help member states to get out of the crisis that started with COVID and the economic impact of that. Now, this is conditional. One of the conditions is that the rule of law, for instance. And because of that, Hungary and Poland is now going to be listed very soon, is missing out on serious money, billions of euros, money that they really do need. But since they do not follow the rules of the game, for instance, independence of the judiciary, how judges are appointed, etc., etc., if you don't follow those rules, European rules that you also subscribe to as a member state, Poland and Hungary, and other member states as well, you don't follow your own rules, we will instigate these sanctions. The biggest sanction is the famous Article 7, which takes away voting rights of the member state in the Council. As far as I know, this has actually never been applied.
And it's referred to as the nuclear option.
Nuclear button.
Exactly. But there's a lot of steps before. And you have to imagine as follows. You as a minister of a member state, you meet with all the other ministers of all the other member states every month and every week, depending on the situation. And all the other ministers, all your colleagues, also meet with all the other ministers of all the member states in the Council on a very regular basis. You have your agenda with the things that you want to bring to the Council. All the other member states do the same thing. You're not playing by the rules. You put your foot down. I don't care what the other member states. I don't care what the Commission says. This is my priority now. Other member states will take note. You get more and more isolated. You cannot push your own agenda anymore. There will be peer pressure. Of course, there's legal the Commission stands for legal procedures, but there's also political pressure. Again, the member state might not be open to that. But again, the price is accumulating over time. You become really isolated in the council. You can still persist. In the meantime, you might also lose your Court of Justice case, piling all the pressure. So it's not that simple, and that's why I say there's a long series of increasingly severe sanctions, both political and formal, in countries, so that countries behave like they should behave as member states, according to rules that they themselves also sign the treaty to. I mean, it's a bit like becoming a member of a sports club. You do not question the rules of the club. You just sign up and you go and you do. Except there's a lot of rules. Would you agree? Sorry? And benefits, absolutely. I mean, I can expound for a good 2 hours on the cost and benefits of membership. But one of the benefits, I already mentioned the crisis management system. Yeah? And the effective sovereignty that you get as a country, no matter what size, you can talk above your weight, so to speak, especially for the smaller memberships. There's costs as well. We will discuss some of these. Like I said, the sanctions are slow, especially the legal ones, they're slow turning. It takes time. People can get frustrated about it. I completely get that. But they are there for a reason. The only thing is, and I have to admit, when we were negotiating with the country that want to become a member, we have real leverage. Because they know that if they don't follow it, they simply will not get in. The member states will not allow it. The Commission will advise not to let these countries in before all of these rules are met. Once a country is a member state, you would think, well, that's only when the game starts. Now you really need to start to follow the rules because now you're a member. In practice, though, of course, as a member state, you have to vote to the council. And it is not so easy often to, well, the Commission does not really want to force countries into it. It just says, you're a member of a sports club, you're forced into doing something, it's not good for you, it doesn't make the club look very well, why is this country behaving so badly? And other member states might think, okay, today is him, tomorrow is me. So you want to reason with the country, give it plenty of opportunity to change. There is formal, and the money hurts. If you stop the money, that really hurts. And I'm sure it contributes to a country changing its stance. It certainly would, to some extent, in the case of Hungary, and maybe also for Poland. Because, like I said, this is serious money. It has turned out that this is actually a good leverage, so to speak. Still, it's difficult. But the wheels of justice in that sense grind slowly, but it does work. So, and Article 7, let's hope we never need it because it means that things have really escalated. I sometimes get the question as well, would it be possible for the EU to throw out the country? I'm not sure if that is possible, but it goes completely against the philosophy of the EU, because if the country is supposed to, you throw it out. Now what? The country is free to do whatever what it pleases. We're not helped by that, we just lost a member. That country is not helped by that. It's out in the cold, on its own, a situation that ever led to a serious breach of maybe rule of law and persistent. Now we leave that population alone, because not everybody there will be happy. Maybe we get a failed state as our neighbors now, as a neighbor now. We don't want that either. The whole philosophy is that we're in this together and we help each other, even if we want or not. Greece was helped during the crisis. There was some talk about Greece throwing Greece out of the Eurozone, and maybe even out of the EU. The member states helped Greece through gritted teeth, because Greece had serious problems there, out of enlightened self-interest. So if we don't help them, under the motto, if we don't hang together, we hang separately. We have to help you, because if you go down, this is not good for me. I don't like you, I think it's completely wrong what you did, I still need to help you. That's often the political and economic reality. But in the end, I think that's a good thing. Because throwing somebody out or isolating a member state in the end doesn't really help anyone. But the sanctions are there. And it's terrible that we have been talking about Article 7 for Poland and Hungary, for instance, still now for Hungary. Although Orban seems to be turning around in certain areas because of huge pressure. And he's missing out on the money, he has now internal problems as well, and economically he's not going that well. All as a part, as a consequence as well of sanctions, not only absolutely no, plays a role.
Okay. Other questions? We are slowly running out of time. And we also have a new face, Mark Donfried, the director of the ICD, gave us the pleasure to join us. Do you want to come on stage for the final round? No, not necessarily. Then maybe we take a photo later. Other comments, questions?
You didn't bring the example of Brexit.
Oh, yes. Well, I mean, Brexit, like I said, is the perfect example of how not to leave the EU alone. I don't think there's a book. I once read in a Belgian newspaper a very nice headline that UK has now, it's like it was compared to a divorce. And in many ways it was a divorce, or it's a good comparison. And the headline said UK now has to deal with 27 ex-wives or ex-husbands. Try to deal with that. The reason they left is political, not economic, and that they shooting themselves in the foot, and that their economies definitely suffered a lot. The Commission President Juncker at the time said, "We're sorry to see you go, and you'll be sorrier." And I think that was a very good way to describe it. Their economy still has not recovered, will not recover for a while. The illusion that they can be better off without the EU is showing up. There's now talk about remorse. Of course, EU, there's no question, by the way, that the EU itself was weakened by that. A big, important member state left the EU. It's not a good look for anybody, not for the EU either. Even if you bend over backward and try to keep them. Because they had every possible advantage they could get from the EU and nothing they did not want. Not the euro, not part of the Schengen area, etc., etc. A rebate from their budget contribution, they had everything. I do not exclude that they will return. Member states will be very happy by that. I think they welcome the UK back. It's not going to happen anytime soon. Except one thing, no one is a nice guy. They will have to enter under exactly the same conditions and the same rules that everybody else had to. Which I think is only fair. The member states have a memory on how and why the UK left. So this was always a damage control exercise for the EU. What was really interesting, historically, politically, economically, is that the UK tried to play off one member state against the other. Well, Germany doesn't want to lose our market for their cars. France doesn't want to lose our market for the wines, etc. And we never realized that for the EU, this was an existential matter. This was not economics. This was about the integrity of the internal market, hanging together, supporting the member states that were going to be hit, entirely not of their fault, like especially Ireland. And what you saw, and like I've rarely ever seen that both the European Commission and the Council and the European Parliament were on completely the same wavelength throughout this period, vis-à-vis the UK. That when the UK talked to Germany, France, or Spain, or wherever, the member states said, no, don't talk to us, talk to the Commission. The Commission is the intermediary for that. We don't want to talk to you. We can talk to you about anything but not Brexit and nothing like that. Go to the Commission. And that was a consistent position, in which, by the way, the Irish diplomacy also played an excellent role. We were very close with the Commission. And this kind of unity, political unity, between Parliament, Commission, and Council is pretty unique for an extended time period. That's really interesting to know, and also something very positive, I think.
I just want to talk about consumer. Just maybe one
Yeah, sure.
I just wanted to know, I know that the EU has a series of projects in a lot of the member countries.
Yeah.
So in the case of the Brexit, when the UK decided to leave the EU, what happened to the projects that were being embarked on by the EU?
Well, I mean, they should not have been influenced because this is EU budget. It's not depending on one member state or any other member state. These are EU projects run or managed often by the Commission. There might have been some bilateral changes because the UK, I know, provides also development aid, like Oxfam and lots of other organizations. That might have been affected. I don't know. But the commitments are there. Simply because a member state leaves does not change the commitments in order to comply.
All right, then I think we close the panel discussion, and please join me for a round of applause for our panelists.